An elderly woman begins to waste away in her own home without understanding why. With every spoonful of soup and every pill given with such care, something inside her vanishes. But when the truth comes to light, even the silence of the walls seems to cry out for justice. If this story grabs you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. I promise, this will be the best story you'll hear all year. Some houses hold stories, and the Miller family's brownstone on the Upper West Side of New York City was one of them. Built in the 50s with its classic pre-war details and wrought-iron gate, it had witnessed entire generations, baptisms, birthdays, anniversaries, but also goodbyes, absences, and silences that weighed more than words. Helen Miller had always been the soul of that house. At 83, she still maintained her upright posture, her steady gaze, and that peculiar way of organizing things around her. Everything had its place. The linen towels in the dining room closet, the porcelain teacups inherited from her mother, the grandfather clock that chimed the hours with almost religious precision. Helen believed that external order helped maintain internal order, and for decades it had worked. A widow for 12 years, ever since her Albert had passed away peacefully in his sleep, she had learned to live with the absence. Not that it had been easy. In the first few months, she would wake up in the middle of the night looking for her husband. She'd make coffee for two. She'd forget he wasn't coming back. But time, that great silent teacher, had taught her to live with the longing. And Helen had found strength in routine, in small pleasures, in the company of her son Michael, and more recently in the presence of her daughter-in-law Vanessa. Michael Miller was the couple's only child. A 48-year-old man, a respected attorney, owner of a firm he had inherited from his father and expanded with dedication and talent. Tall, with graying hair at his temples, he had the same faded blue eyes that Helen recognized in the mirror from her youth. Michael had always been attentive, but he had also always been busy. Work consumed him. Cases, hearings, clients who depended on him. He loved his mother deeply. She never doubted that. But love sometimes is expressed in absences justified by necessity. That was how Vanessa entered the family's life. Michael had met her 3 years earlier at a corporate event. She was 10 years younger, also a lawyer, but in a different field. Tax law, she had explained with a smile that lit up her face. Beautiful, in a discreet but striking way. Brown hair always tied in a flawless bun, dark eyes that seemed to study everything around them. Sober, elegant clothes. Vanessa had class, that was undeniable. The courtship was brief. 6 months later, they were married. Helen, at the time, had been surprised by the speed. But Michael was happy, and that was enough. Vanessa seemed genuinely interested in being part of the family. She visited her mother-in-law, brought flowers, asked about old recipes. Helen had felt welcomed by that female presence she had missed so much since Albert's passing. In the beginning, everything went well. Vanessa helped with household chores, chatted with Helen about trivial things, and accompanied her to doctor's appointments when Michael couldn't. The elderly woman had begun to trust her, to even like her, perhaps not with the deep affection built over decades, but with the warmth one feels for someone who shows effort and dedication. But then something started to change. It was subtle at first. Helen, who had always been in excellent health, began to feel an inexplicable fatigue. She would wake up with no energy. Her legs felt heavy. Her head throbbed slightly, nothing major, but it was constant. She attributed it to age. After all, 83 years don't pass without a trace. The body takes its toll. The joints complain. It's natural, she thought. Michael, concerned, insisted she get a full checkup. Vanessa offered to go with her. She was the one who scheduled the appointments, organized the doctor's orders, and noted the medication times. Helen, used to taking care of herself, felt a little invaded at first. But Vanessa was so attentive, so careful. She said it was her duty as a daughter-in-law, that Michael worked too much and that she, Vanessa, had more free time. The test results came back with a few irregularities. Nothing serious, according to the doctor. Slightly high blood pressure, high cholesterol, low vitamin D. Common things for people her age. He prescribed medications. Vanessa took charge of picking everything up from the pharmacy. She organized the Pills in a special organizer, sorted by time of day, morning, afternoon, night. Everything was meticulously controlled. Helen should have felt grateful, and she did, for a while. But there was something that bothered her, a vague feeling, hard to name. Maybe it was the way Vanessa insisted she take her medicine at the exact times without delay, or the way she controlled what she ate, always with the argument that it was for her health. Light soups, salads with no salt, natural juices that had a bitter taste but which, according to Vanessa, were great for her circulation. Fatigue didn't go away, on the contrary, it got worse. Helen started having dizzy spells. One morning, as she got out of bed, her legs gave way and she almost fell. She grabbed the nightstand at the last second. Her heart raced. Fear washed over her. Was this the beginning of the end? She had always feared losing her independence, depending on others, becoming a burden. Vanessa, upon hearing about the incident, was visibly concerned. She immediately called Michael, who arrived home a few hours later, his face etched with anguish. He held his mother's hands, looked into her eyes, and said they would go to the doctor again, that they would do all the necessary tests, that she would be okay. But Helen noticed something. In the following weeks, Vanessa began to accompany her to all her appointments. And more than that, she started speaking for her mother-in-law. When the doctor asked how she was feeling, Vanessa would answer before Helen could open her mouth. She'd say the elderly woman was confused, forgetful, that she mixed up the days. Helen tried to protest, but Vanessa would smile with that controlled kindness and say it was natural, that there was no reason to be ashamed. The doctor, a middle-aged man with little patience for long conversations, seemed to accept everything Vanessa said without question. He increased the dosages of some medications. He prescribed new ones. Helen left the appointments with an ever-growing list of prescriptions. And Vanessa, always efficient, took care of everything. That's when Yvonne started to notice. Yvonne Jackson had worked for the Millers for 26 years. She had started as a cleaning lady when she was just 22, hired by Helen to help with the house. Over time, she had become part of the family, not just an employee, but a constant presence, a confidant, a friend. Yvonne knew every corner of that house. She knew where the spare keys were, which cabinets creaked, in which drawer Helen kept her husband's old letters. She was a simple woman from a humble background, who had come up from rural Georgia looking for a better life. In the Miller family, she had found more than a job. She had found respect, affection, a place in the world. Helen treated her with dignity. She asked about her children, had helped pay for part of the oldest son's education. Yvonne felt a deep loyalty to that family, and especially to Helen. In recent months, Yvonne had been noticing changes, not just in her employer's physical condition, but in the dynamics of the house. Vanessa, who used to be just an occasional presence, was now always around. She controlled everything: meal times, visitors, even access to Helen's room. Yvonne could no longer go in to clean without asking for permission. Vanessa said her mother-in-law needed rest, tranquility. But Yvonne knew Helen, and the woman she saw now was not the same. Her vitality had vanished. Her gaze, once sharp and curious, had become dull. Helen spent most of the day in bed or sitting in the living room armchair, staring into space. She no longer read. She no longer did her needlepoint. She no longer called her friends. It was as if she were being slowly erased. One afternoon, while tidying up the kitchen, Yvonne heard raised voices coming from Helen's room. She approached quietly. Vanessa was there, holding a glass with a whitish liquid. Helen, sitting on the bed, was refusing. "I don't want this, Vanessa. Leave me alone." The old woman's voice was weak, but there was a hint of resistance in it. "Mrs. Miller, you need to take this. It's the supplement the doctor prescribed. It will help with the weakness." "I don't want it," Helen repeated, turning her face away. Vanessa sighed, impatient. She placed the glass on the nightstand and sat next to her mother-in-law. Her tone of voice changed. It became softer, almost syrupy. "You're being difficult. Michael will be worried if he finds out you're not cooperating. He has so much on his mind. You don't want to be a burden to him, do you?" Helen lowered her eyes. Yvonne saw the look of defeat on the old woman's face. And she also saw the brief, satisfied smile that crossed Vanessa's lips. It sent a chill down her spine. Without making a sound, Yvonne returned to the kitchen. Her heart was pounding. There was something very wrong here. But what could she do? She had no proof. Just a bad feeling, an instinct that Helen was being manipulated. But how to prove it? How could she tell Michael without sounding like she was making things up? That night, Michael came home late from the office. He was exhausted. His shoulders slumped, his suit wrinkled. Vanessa greeted him with a kiss on the cheek and a glass of whiskey. He thanked her, took a long sip, and asked about his mother. "She's sleeping," Vanessa replied. "She had a quiet day, took all her medicine on time, ate a little soup. She's weaker, Michael. I think we should consider hiring a nurse." "A nurse?" Michael frowned. "But aren't you taking care of her?" "I am, but I'm not trained. What if something happens? I feel responsible. I think it would be better to have a professional." Michael thought for a moment. Then he nodded in agreement. "You're right. I'll look for someone. Thank you for taking care of her, honey. I don't know what I'd do without you." Vanessa smiled, a smile that Yvonne, watching from the kitchen doorway, found too cold to be genuine. The days that followed were a succession of small events that, in isolation, seemed harmless, but together they formed a disturbing pattern. Helen began to complain of stomach pains. Vanessa said it was gastritis, a side effect of the medication. The doctor, contacted by phone, prescribed another medicine to protect her stomach. Vanessa got it. Yvonne noticed that the medicine bottles were multiplying, not just the officially prescribed ones, but others. Supplements, vitamins, herbal remedies. Vanessa said they were all natural, that they helped. But Helen seemed to be getting worse. Her clothes hung on her emaciated body. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken. She complained of a constant metallic taste in her mouth, of nausea, of dizzy spells that made her afraid to leave her bed. Michael, buried in his work, only saw his mother at night and on weekends. And when he did, Vanessa was always nearby, controlling the conversation, answering for her. Michael, tired and trusting his wife, didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. One morning, Yvonne found Helen alone in the living room. It was rare. Vanessa had gone out to run an errand at the bank. Yvonne seized the moment and sat next to the elderly woman. "Mrs. Miller, are you okay?" she asked, holding the wrinkled hand with affection. The old woman looked at her. There were tears in her eyes. "Yvonne, I don't know what's happening to me. I feel so tired, so weak. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy." "You're not going crazy," Yvonne said firmly. "You're the most lucid person I know. But they say I'm confused, that I forget things, and it's true, Yvonne, I do forget. I don't know what day it is anymore. I can't remember if I've taken my medicine. Sometimes I wake up and I don't know where I am." Yvonne felt a tightness in her chest. Something was deeply wrong. But what? And how could she help without being sure? "Mrs. Miller, how many medications are you taking?" "I don't know. Vanessa handles that. There are so many. Pills, capsules, liquids. She says they're all necessary." Yvonne made a decision right then. She would investigate. Discreetly, but she would. Because if there was one thing she knew, it was that Helen deserved to be protected, and if no one else was seeing what was happening, she would. When Vanessa returned, Yvonne was in the kitchen preparing lunch. Vanessa walked in, put her purse on a chair, and went to Helen's room. Yvonne waited a few minutes and then, under the pretext of bringing clean towels, went to the hallway. The bedroom door was ajar. She could see Vanessa organizing the medications on the nightstand, separating pills, pouring liquids into glasses, all with an almost mechanical precision. Yvonne watched. Then, when Vanessa left the room to answer the phone, she quickly slipped inside. She looked at the table. There were so many bottles. She read some of the labels: blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine, anxiety medicine, iron supplements, vitamins. And some she didn't recognize. She mentally noted the names. Then she left before Vanessa came back. That night, at home, Yvonne searched the internet. She typed in the names of the medications. She read about side effects. And she discovered something alarming. Many of those drugs, when used together and in improper doses, could cause the exact symptoms Helen was experiencing: weakness, dizziness, mental confusion, nausea, Some of them should not be combined. The drug information leaflets warned against it. Yvonne's blood ran cold. Was Vanessa giving her the wrong medication, out of incompetence? Or something worse? She needed proof. She had to be sure before accusing someone, especially Michael's wife. But how could she get proof? The answer came unexpectedly. A few days later, while cleaning the Home Office, Yvonne found an open envelope. Inside were documents, papers from a lawyer's office. She shouldn't read them. She knew that. But curiosity, mixed with concern, won out. They were documents related to Helen's will and the family's assets. The house was worth millions, plus investments, properties, stocks, all in Helen's name, to be transferred to Michael when she was gone. And with Michael married to Vanessa, half of that would become hers. Yvonne closed her eyes. The motive was right there, clear as day. It wasn't love. It wasn't care. It was greed. Vanessa wanted the inheritance, and the weaker Helen became, the more control she would have over everything. But she still lacked definitive proof. Yvonne couldn't just accuse Vanessa of mismanaging the medications without concrete evidence. Michael would never believe her. He was blinded by affection, by trust. So Yvonne decided to document everything. She started writing down the times Vanessa gave Helen her medicine. Which medicines? In what quantities? She asked her daughter, who worked as a nursing assistant, for help in understanding the drug interactions. And she began to discreetly take pictures of the bottles, the prescriptions, anything that could be relevant. Meanwhile, Helen continued to fade. She no longer left her bed except to go to the bathroom. Her legs couldn't support her anymore. The garden she loved so much, with its rose bushes and dogwood tree, was right there on the other side of the window, like a distant world she could no longer reach. The rose bushes she had tended so carefully were wilting. No one was watering them. No one cared. Michael, increasingly worried, talked about admitting his mother to the hospital to run more detailed tests. Vanessa agreed, but always came up with an excuse to postpone it. She'd say Helen was too frail to leave the house, that the stress of a hospital stay could make things worse, that it was better to maintain her routine, the familiar environment. And Michael, exhausted, accepted it. He trusted her. One night Yvonne was about to leave when she heard strange sounds coming from Helen's room. They were low moans of pain. She ran there. She found the elderly woman curled up in bed, her hands clutching her stomach, her face contorted in agony. "Mrs. Miller, what is it?" "It hurts, Yvonne. It hurts so much." Yvonne ran to get Vanessa, who was in the living room watching television. "Mrs. Vanessa, Mrs. Miller is very sick." Vanessa got up with infuriating calmness. She went to the room, looked at her mother-in-law, and said in a neutral tone that it was just a gastritis flare-up, that it would pass. She gave her another pain pill and went back to the living room. Yvonne was outraged. How could she be so cold, so indifferent? She sat next to Helen, held her hand, and stayed there until the old woman fell asleep, exhausted. That night, Yvonne made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to act. Helen was in danger. It might not be intentional, but the negligence was clear. Vanessa was not taking proper care of her. In fact, she was causing more harm than good. Yvonne needed to show this to Michael, but she knew he wouldn't believe her easily. She needed something irrefutable, and she had an idea of how to get it. The following days were a blur of silent observation and growing anguish. Yvonne had become an unlikely investigator, driven not by curiosity but by love and loyalty. Every morning, upon arriving at the Miller house, she felt the weight of responsibility. She knew she was treading on dangerous ground, that she was in a way questioning her employer's wife, but Helen's increasingly pale face, the eyes that lost their sparkle day by day, all of it pushed her to keep going. Vanessa, for her part, seemed oblivious to any suspicion, or she was very good at faking it. She continued her meticulous routine. She woke up early, prepared Michael's breakfast, kissed him before he left for the office. Then she dedicated herself entirely to her mother-in-law's care, or what she called care. Yvonne began to pay attention to every detail. She noticed that Vanessa prevented other people from visiting Helen. When one of the elderly woman's friends called, Vanessa would answer and say her mother-in-law was resting, that it wasn't a good time. She would promise to call back later, but she never did. Gradually, the friends stopped calling. Helen, who had always been sociable, was now isolated. Yvonne also noticed that Vanessa strictly controlled her mother-in-law's diet. The meals were always too light, thin soups with few nutrients, bitter teas, juices that Helen complained had a strange taste. Vanessa justified everything with medical arguments. She said it was because of her blood pressure, her cholesterol, her age, that a heavy diet could overload her already fragile system. But Yvonne knew that Helen had always eaten well. She had always appreciated a good plate of food made with care, and now, reduced to those tiny, tasteless portions, she was losing weight before their eyes. Her clothes hung on her body. The jewelry she wore no longer fit on her thin fingers. One morning, Yvonne decided to confront Vanessa subtly. She was preparing lunch when the daughter-in-law entered the kitchen. "Mrs. Vanessa, could I make a heartier soup today, with chicken, vegetables? I think it would do Mrs. Miller some good." Vanessa looked at her with an expression Yvonne couldn't decipher. There was something hard in her gaze. "Yvonne, I appreciate your concern, but I'm the one who manages my mother-in-law's diet. I know exactly what she needs. The doctor was clear in his recommendations. Nothing too heavy." "But she's so weak," Yvonne insisted, trying to maintain a respectful tone. "Maybe she needs more protein, more energy." "You're not a doctor, Yvonne, or a nutritionist. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." The tone was sharp, final. Yvonne lowered her eyes and went back to work. But inside she was seething. It wasn't a matter of hierarchy or respect, it was a matter of watching someone she loved waste away before her eyes. That same day, Yvonne took advantage of a moment when Vanessa went out to the pharmacy and entered Helen's room. The elderly woman was sitting in her armchair looking out the window. The garden outside seemed so far away, so inaccessible. "Mrs. Miller, can I talk to you?" The old woman turned slowly. The movement seemed to take a great deal of effort. "Of course, Yvonne. Sit here." Yvonne pulled up a chair and sat beside her. She held her employer's hand, feeling how cold it was. The thin fingers trembled slightly. "Mrs. Miller, I need you to be honest with me. How are you really feeling?" The old woman sighed, a sigh that came from deep within, heavy with exhaustion and resignation. "I don't know, Yvonne. I really don't know. Some days I wake up and don't recognize my own body. Everything hurts, my head is always foggy. I forget things. Yesterday I couldn't remember my own mother's name. Can you imagine? I spent hours trying to remember and I couldn't. It came back later, but the fear stayed. The fear that one day I'll forget everything, that I'll lose myself." Yvonne felt tears burn in her eyes. She held Helen's hand more firmly. "You're not going to lose yourself, I won't let you." "But what if it's just age, Yvonne? What if it's just my body giving up? I've lived so long. Maybe it's time." "It's not time," Yvonne said with conviction. "You still have so much life to live. But I need you to help me. I need to understand what's happening. Do you remember how many medications you're taking?" Helen made a visible effort to concentrate. "So many. In the morning, Vanessa gives me 5 or 6 pills. Then there are the liquids. In the afternoon, a few more. At night, the same thing. I don't know the names. She takes care of it. Says they're all necessary, that the doctor prescribed them." "And do you feel anything different when you take them?" "I do. I feel nauseous. My stomach burns. My head feels heavier. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to faint, but Vanessa says it's normal, that it's my body getting used to it." Yvonne took a deep breath. She needed concrete proof. Opinions and suspicions wouldn't be enough to convince Michael. "Mrs. Miller, would you trust me to do something?" "I trust you with my life, Yvonne." "Then I need you to keep a secret. Don't tell anyone, not even Michael. Not yet. I'm going to find out what's happening, but I need a little time." The old woman looked at Yvonne for a long moment. Then she nodded in agreement. "Do whatever you have to do." When Vanessa returned from the pharmacy, Yvonne was already back in the kitchen preparing dinner. Vanessa walked past her without a word, heading straight to her mother-in-law's room with a bag full of new medications. Yvonne waited until Vanessa left the room and then, With the excuse of bringing fresh water, she went in. She took the opportunity to photograph all the medicine bottles on the nightstand with her phone. Then, she sent the photos to her daughter, the nursing assistant, asking her to analyze them. The response came a few hours later when Yvonne was already home. Her daughter called, her voice filled with concern. "Mum, these medications can't be taken together like this. There are serious drug interactions, and the dosages are way too high for someone her age. This could be causing all the symptoms you told me about. Who prescribed this?" "The doctor, according to the daughter-in-law, but I'm not sure." "Mum, you need to talk to the doctor, directly, without going through the daughter-in-law. Something is very wrong here." Yvonne thanked her and hung up. But how could she talk to the doctor? She didn't have his contact information, and Vanessa controlled everything. She decided to try a different approach. The next day, when Vanessa went out shopping, Yvonne searched through Helen's papers and found the name of her doctor. Dr. Robert Anderson, a cardiologist. There was a phone number written down. Yvonne called. A receptionist answered. Yvonne explained that she worked for the family and needed to confirm some information about the medications prescribed for Helen Miller. "One moment, I'll check." Yvonne waited, her heart pounding. She was afraid of being discovered, afraid Vanessa would walk in and catch her on the phone. The receptionist returned. "Ma'am, Dr. Anderson does see Mrs. Miller, but her last appointment was 3 months ago, and according to her chart, he only prescribed 2 medications, one for blood pressure and one for cholesterol. Nothing else." Yvonne's blood ran cold. "Only 2? "Yes. Why do you ask?" Yvonne quickly improvised. "It's just that she's taking several, and I wanted to make sure they were all prescribed by the doctor." The receptionist was silent for a moment. "Look, I don't know who's administering other medications, but if that's the case, the family should speak with the doctor. Unprescribed medication can be dangerous, especially for the elderly." Yvonne thanked her and hung up. Now she had the proof she needed. Vanessa was giving her medications that hadn't been prescribed. But why? Incompetence or something more sinister? She had to show this to Michael, but she knew that if she told him directly without visual proof, he might not believe her. Vanessa had an impressive ability to manipulate situations, to play the victim, to turn the tables. Yvonne decided she needed a recording, something that would unequivocally show what was happening, and for that, she needed to be patient and wait for the right moment. That moment came a few days later. It was a Thursday afternoon. Michael was away on a business trip, having gone to Chicago to handle an important case. Vanessa took advantage of her husband's absence to relax. Yvonne noticed she was on the phone with someone laughing, her voice looser than usual. Yvonne pretended to be busy in the laundry room, but kept her ears open. She could overhear the conversation. "Yes, everything's going according to plan. She's getting weaker every day, more dependent. Michael has no idea. He trusts me so much. It's almost funny." Vanessa laughed. "No, I'm not going to rush things. It has to look natural. Old age, you know. No one will question it." Yvonne felt her blood boil. Who was on the other end of the line? What exactly was Vanessa planning? She had to record this. She took out her phone, started the voice recorder, and moved a little closer to the living room door. How long? I don't know. A few months, maybe. Depends on how her body reacts. But it's already pretty advanced. She barely gets out of bed, barely eats. She's perfectly isolated. No one visits her. It's only a matter of time until she's completely incapacitated. And then everything goes to Michael. And half of it is mine. Yvonne had to restrain herself from storming into the room right then and confronting Vanessa. But she knew she had to be strategic. She kept recording. "No, he won't find out. He's so busy with work, he barely has time to look at his own mother. And when he does, I'm always there, controlling the narrative, telling him she's confused, that she's losing her faculties. He believes me. He always believes me." The call ended shortly after. Vanessa hung up and left the room, walking past Yvonne without even a glance. Yvonne stood frozen, her phone still recording, her hands shaking. She had the proof. She had the confession. Now she had to decide how to use it. She waited until evening. When Vanessa went to take a shower, Yvonne entered Helen's room. The old woman was lying down, her eyes closed, but she wasn't asleep. She opened her eyes when she sensed Yvonne's presence. "Mrs. Miller, I need to tell you something. Something very serious." And then, carefully and gently, Yvonne told her everything. The suspicions, the call with the doctor, the recording. She played the audio for the elderly woman. Helen listened in silence, her face growing paler. When the audio finished, she closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "I knew something was wrong, I knew it. But I never imagined it was this, that she wanted to get rid of me. It's not getting rid of you, Mrs. Miller. It's severe negligence, manipulation. But we can stop this. We'll show Michael." "How? He believes her so much." Yvonne took a deep breath. "We'll have to be careful, but I have a plan." Yvonne's plan was simple but risky. She would wait for Michael to return from his trip and then show him all the evidence at once. The recording, the photos of the medications, the information from the doctor. All of it together so that he couldn't deny or ignore it. But before she could execute the plan, something happened. It was a Friday night when Michael returned from Chicago. He was tired but had brought gifts, a box of his mother's favorite cookies. He got home around 9 o'clock. Vanessa greeted him with a tight hug. "How was your trip?" "Exhausting but productive. And how's my mother?" "The same. Weak, confused. I think it's time we think about putting her in a facility, Michael, or at least hiring a full-time nurse." Michael nodded, concerned. He went up to his mother's room. Yvonne was there, helping Helen get into bed. When Michael entered, she discreetly stepped away but stayed close, watching. "Mom, I brought you some cookies." Helen looked at her son. There was something different in her eyes, a lucidity that hadn't been there for weeks, as if she had made a decision. "Michael, I need to talk to you alone." Michael glanced at Yvonne, who left the room, but she stayed near the door, listening. Helen gathered her strength and began to speak. She told him about the medications, the strange tastes, how she felt controlled. Michael listened, his expression growing more and more grim. "Mom, why? Didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I thought I was going crazy, that it was all in my head, but now I know it's not." Michael held his mother's hand. "I'm going to talk to Vanessa. I'll demand an explanation." "No, Michael. It's not just about talking, there's more. You need to listen to Yvonne." Michael called for Yvonne, who entered the room. She showed him the photos of the medications. She told him about the call with the doctor, and finally, with trembling hands, she showed him the recording. She played the audio. Michael listened in silence. With every word from Vanessa, his face changed. First disbelief, then shock, then rage, a deep, visceral rage. When the audio ended, he was pale. This can't be true. It can't be. But it was, and he knew it. Michael sat on the edge of his mother's bed for long minutes in silence, processing, trying to understand how the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted, could do something like this, how he had been so blind. Finally, he stood up. His face was a mask of determination and pain. "I'm going to confront her now." Helen grabbed her son's arm. "Be careful, Michael. She's smart. She'll try to defend herself. She'll try to turn this against you, against us." "I know, Mom. But she's not getting away with this." Michael went downstairs. Vanessa was in the living room watching television. She stood up with a smile when she saw him. "Honey, do you want dinner? I made that risotto you like." Michael didn't answer. He got straight to the point. "Vanessa, we need to talk." His tone made her smile vanish. "What is it? Did something happen?" Michael took out his phone and played the recording. Vanessa listened, at first confused. Then, as she recognized her own voice, her face transformed. First it went white, then red. Her eyes widened. "Where did you get this? Who recorded it?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that it's your voice. Admitting you're slowly poisoning my mother, saying you're waiting for her to die to get the inheritance." Vanessa started to tremble, but instead of denying it, instead of apologizing, she attacked. "You don't understand anything. Do you think it's easy taking care of her day after day? While you're at your office making money, living your life, I'm the one. Who's here? I'm the one who puts up with her complaints, her stubbornness, and yes, I want what's mine by right. Half of everything. I deserve it. Michael was stunned. By right? You have no right to anything that belongs to my mother, and you weren't taking care of her, you were destroying her. I just gave her a few extra pills, nothing that would really hurt her, just enough to make her weaker, more dependent, to speed up the natural process. She's old. She's not going to last much longer anyway. Michael felt sick to his stomach. How had he gotten here? How had he married this person? You're sick, Vanessa. You need help. I'm not sick. I'm a realist. I knew you'd never give me what I deserved. It was always your mother first, always. So I decided to take what's mine. Michael took a deep breath, trying to control his rage. You're getting out of this house now, and I'm filing for divorce. Vanessa laughed, a hysterical, humorless laugh. Divorce? You think it's going to be that easy? I'll fight. I'll take everything I can. I'll destroy you and your mother if I have to. Try it. But with this recording, you won't get anything. Vanessa froze. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a weight. She was trapped, exposed, finished. She stood there for a moment, staring at Michael. Then, in a sudden movement, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Michael was left alone in the living room, his heart racing, his hands shaking. He went back up to his mother's room. Helen and Yvonne were waiting, anxious. She's gone, Michael said, his voice weak, and she's not coming back. The dawn that followed. That night was one of the longest Michael had ever lived through. He couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, the lights off, only the glow from the street filtering through the blinds. His head was spinning. He tried to process everything that had happened. How had he not seen it? How had he been so blind? Upstairs, in her room, Helen was also awake. Yvonne had stayed with her, sleeping in an armchair beside the bed like a silent guardian. The elderly woman stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a jumble of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth had been discovered in time. Sadness for the pain she saw in her son. When the sun began to rise, Michael finally stood up. He went to his mother's room. He found her awake, Yvonne still asleep in the armchair. "Good morning, Mum." "Good morning, son." Michael sat on the edge of the bed. He took his mother's hand and squeezed it gently. "Forgive me." Helen frowned. "Forgive you for what?" "For not seeing it, for trusting her blindly, for letting her do this to you." "Michael, it's not your fault. She was convincing, manipulative, and you, my son, have always been one to trust people. You always see the best in others. That's not a flaw, it's a virtue. The fault was hers, not yours." Michael felt his eyes burn. It had been years since he'd cried, but in that moment, the emotion overwhelmed him. He wept. He wept for his mother. He wept for himself. He wept for the marriage that had been revealed as a sham. Helen ran her hand through her son's hair, just as she did when he was a child. "It's going to be okay, Michael. We'll get through this. Together." Yvonne woke with the movement. Seeing mother and son in that moment of vulnerability, her heart ached. But she also felt hope. The truth, however painful, had the power to set them free. In the days that followed, the house began to change. The first thing Michael did was take his mother to a doctor, not Dr. Anderson, who, though competent, hadn't closely followed the case, but to a geriatrician recommended by a colleague, Dr. Frank Carter, a man in his 60s, experienced and thorough. Michael explained the situation. He showed him the list of medications his mother had been taking. He showed him the dosages. The doctor was alarmed. "Mr. Miller, your mother could have had severe complications. These drug interactions are dangerous. She was lucky, very lucky." Dr. Carter ordered a battery of tests: blood, urine, an EKG, an ultrasound. He wanted to assess if there was any permanent damage. The tests were done over the course of a week. Helen, slowly, began to feel better. Without the excess medication, without the strange liquids, her body started to respond. She was still weak, but the mental fog was lifting. Her lucidity was returning. When the results came in, the doctor called them in for a talk. "Good news, there's no irreversible damage. Her liver is a bit overworked, but with monitoring it should recover. Her kidneys are functioning. Her heart is stable. Helen was very lucky. Her body is resilient. Michael sighed, relieved. Helen smiled for the first time in weeks. Dr. Carter prescribed only 2 medications, the same ones Dr. Anderson had prescribed months ago, for blood pressure and cholesterol, nothing more. And he asked that she start eating properly again. Protein, vitamins, carbohydrates, a balanced diet. No unnecessary restrictions. Yvonne took on the responsibility of preparing the meals, and she did it with love. Hearty soups full of vegetables and chicken, roast chicken and potatoes, grilled steaks, fresh salads, simple desserts like bread pudding and apple pie. Helen began to gain weight. Her clothes started to fit again. Her face regained some of its color. Her hands stopped trembling, but physical recovery was only part of it. The emotional recovery was more complex. Helen carried the trauma of what she had lived through, the feeling of being betrayed by someone who should have protected her, the vulnerability of having been so close to losing everything. Michael suggested she see a therapist. They found a psychologist specializing in seniors, Dr. Martha Foster, a kind and attentive woman. The sessions began. At first, Helen resisted. She said she didn't need to talk about it, that she just wanted to forget. But Dr. Foster was patient. Slowly, Helen opened up. She talked about the fear, the loneliness, the feeling of being erased, and in talking, she began to heal. Meanwhile, Michael handled the legal side. He contacted a lawyer specializing in family law. He explained the situation. The lawyer was clear. With the evidence they had, the recording, the doctor's testimony, Vanessa wouldn't have much of a chance at a favorable division of assets. Michael could file for divorce based on breach of trust and gross negligence, and what's more, he could sue for emotional distress. But Michael hesitated, not because he felt sorry for Vanessa, but because he wanted to end it as quickly as possible. He didn't want to prolong the suffering. He didn't want his mother to have to testify, to relive it all in a courtroom. The lawyer understood. He proposed a settlement. Vanessa would receive a fair amount, enough to start over, but nothing more. In return, she would sign a confidentiality agreement and not contest the divorce. Michael agreed. It wasn't about the money. It was about peace. Vanessa, when contacted by Michael's lawyer, initially resisted. She said she would fight, that she wouldn't be treated this way. But when the lawyer presented the evidence, when he made it clear that she could face not only divorce proceedings, but civil and even criminal charges for gross negligence, she backed down. She realized she had no way out. She accepted the settlement. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Michael never saw Vanessa again. She left New York, moved to another city. Some said she went to the West Coast. Others said she went back to her hometown. Michael didn't want to know. For him, that chapter was closed. But for Helen, there was still much to process. She began to reflect on everything that had happened, on how she had reached that point, on the signs she had ignored, on the trust she had placed in the wrong person. One afternoon, during a session with Dr. Foster, she opened up. "I feel guilty for letting this happen, for not realizing it sooner." The psychologist looked at her kindly. "Helen, manipulation works exactly like that. Manipulative people are skilled. They know how to gain trust, how to control the situation. You are not to blame. You were a victim. But I should have been stronger. I should have resisted. You did resist. You survived. And that's what matters." Helen was silent. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I survived." And that was liberating. Understanding that she wasn't guilty, that she wasn't weak, that she had been the victim of a situation beyond her control, and that now she had the chance to rebuild her life. As the weeks went by, Helen began to reconnect with the outside world. She started receiving visitors again. Her old friends, who had been pushed away by Vanessa, returned. There were afternoon teas with homemade cookies, conversations about the old days, laughter. The house, which had been so silent and heavy, was once again filled with life. Michael changed too. He realized he had put work first for too long, that he had neglected not only his mother, but his own life. He decided to reorganize his priorities. He started leaving the office earlier. He spent afternoons with Helen. They talked, they watched movies, together. They played cards, simple things, but they made all the difference. Yvonne, who had been the silent hero of this whole story, was recognized by the family as much more than an employee. Michael gave her a substantial raise. He offered to help with her children's education. But more than that, he treated her with the respect and affection she had always deserved. Helen, for her part, began to call her a friend, because that's what she was, a true friend. But not everything was perfect. There were moments of sadness. Michael sometimes still found himself thinking about Vanessa, not with longing but with incomprehension. How could someone do something like that? How could she be so cold, so calculating? He talked about it with his own therapist because he had started therapy too. His therapist, Dr. Beatrice Lewis, explained that people like that exist, that it's not always possible to understand their motivations, that the important thing was to learn from the experience, strengthen personal boundaries, and move forward. Michael tried. Day by day, he tried. Helen, for her part, had her own demons. She would wake up some nights with a start, dreaming that she was still, being controlled, that the medications were back, that the weakness was returning. But then she would look around. She would see her room, her things. She would smell the familiar scent of the house, and she would remember that she was safe. One afternoon, she decided to do something symbolic. She went out to the garden she had loved so much and that had been neglected during her months of suffering. The rose bushes were almost completely dry. But deep down, there was still a green shoot, a sign of life. Helen, with Yvonne's help, began to tend to the garden again. They watered the plants, they pruned the dead branches, they fertilized the soil. And slowly, miraculously, the rose bushes began to bloom, small pink flowers emerging from the green leaves. It was like a symbol, proof that even after nearly dying, life could return. Michael, seeing his mother in the garden covered in dirt, smiling as she tended to her plants, felt his heart swell with emotion. There was the woman he knew, strong, resilient, full of life. But there was still one pending issue. What to do about Vanessa? Not legally, that was already resolved. But emotionally, Helen needed to decide if she could forgive, not for Vanessa's sake but for her own, so she could move on without carrying the weight of resentment. She talked about it with Dr. Foster. I don't know if I can forgive her. She tried to destroy my life, my body, my mind. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Helen. It doesn't mean saying what she did was acceptable. Forgiveness is freeing yourself from the prison of hatred. It's choosing not to carry what doesn't belong to you. But how do I do that? One step at a time, by acknowledging the pain, validating your feelings, but also by recognizing that you survived, that you are stronger than you imagine, and that the life ahead of you is more important than the past you've left behind. Helen absorbed those words, and she began to work on it. It wasn't easy. Some nights the anger returned, the indignation, the questioning of why this had happened to her. But slowly, with time and therapy, she began to find peace. She began to understand that Vanessa was a person with her own demons, that perhaps she had been driven by greed, but also by insecurity, by a fear of not being enough. It didn't justify what she had done, but it helped to contextualize it, to humanize it, and somehow to lift some of the weight of the betrayal. One day, 6 months after the confrontation, Helen woke up and realized she hadn't thought about Vanessa upon waking. For the first time in months, her first thought wasn't about what had happened. It was about breakfast, about the sun streaming through the window, about the birds singing in the garden. She smiled. It was a sign that she was healing. That afternoon, Michael took her for a walk. They went to a park she used to frequent when she was young. They walked slowly, she leaning on a light cane, he by her side, attentive. They sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. They sat there, in silence, just enjoying the moment. "Michael," Helen said suddenly, "I want to thank you." "Thank me for what, Mom?" "For saving me, for believing in me, for not abandoning me." Michael held his mother's hand. "I would never abandon you. Never. You're the most important person in my life, and and sorry it took me so long to realize what was happening. You realized it in time, and that's what matters." They stayed there for a while longer. Then they went home. When they arrived, Yvonne was waiting for them with dinner ready. A bountiful table, full of colors and flavors. They sat down together. They talked. They laughed. And for the first time in a long time, the Miller house was full of joy. But the journey wasn't over. Helen still had challenges ahead. She needed to completely rebuild her trust, not just in other people but in herself. She needed to learn to say no, to set boundaries, to not let herself be controlled. And Michael had his own journey too. He needed to learn to forgive himself, to not blame himself forever for not seeing the signs. He needed to understand that it's not always possible to protect the ones we love from everything, that sometimes, despite our best efforts, bad things happen. But they were together. And they had Yvonne by their side. And they had professionals helping them. And they had, above all, love, a true love that doesn't seek to control but to liberate, that doesn't seek to dominate but to support. And with that love they knew they could overcome anything, because true love, the kind that withstands storms, is unshakable. And that's what they had, for each other, and for themselves. A year had passed since that night of confrontation, a year of rebuilding, of healing, of learning. The Miller family's brownstone on the Upper West Side now had a completely different feel. It wasn't just that the decor had changed, though a few things had been updated. It was the energy, the atmosphere, the feeling you got when you walked through those old walls. Helen woke up every morning with energy, no longer that deep fatigue that had paralyzed her, no longer the mental fog that had haunted her. She would open her eyes, stretch her arms, and feel her body respond. Her legs, which once could barely support her, now carried her through the garden without the help of a cane. Her face, once pale and gaunt, had a healthy glow. Her eyes, once dull, shone again. She had resumed her hobbies. She was doing needlepoint again. Tablecloths, napkins, everything was adorned with new designs under her skillful hands. She was reading again. She devoured novels, biographies, even some detective stories that made her laugh at the irony of everything she had lived through. And most importantly, she was living again. Michael was different too. He had learned, in the most painful way possible, that work should never come before family. He had completely reorganized his routine. He hired 2 junior associates to help at the firm. He delegated tasks. He learned to say no to demanding clients who wanted his full availability. And he reserved his afternoons for his mother. They developed new rituals. Every Thursday, they went to the movies together. They chose random films, sometimes good, sometimes terrible, but they always had fun. On Saturdays, they walked in the park. On Sundays, they ate out at different restaurants, exploring the city's cuisine. Michael had rediscovered his mother, and she her son. Yvonne remained the heart of that home. But now, in addition to taking care of the cleaning and cooking, she was treated like a member of the family. She sat at the table for meals. She participated in conversations. She gave her opinion. And she was heard. Her children, whom she could barely help financially before, were now studying in good schools, with scholarships Michael had arranged. Her oldest was already in college studying nursing. He wanted to follow in his mother's footsteps. Yvonne felt immense pride. But not everything was perfect. There were still scars. Helen had moments of anxiety. When she had to take the medications prescribed by Dr. Carter, those 2 simple pills, she sometimes hesitated. She would look at them with suspicion. Michael would notice. He would sit beside her, hold her hand, and tell her it was okay. That he had checked the medications, that the doctor was trustworthy. And slowly, she would swallow the pills. But the trauma was there. Perhaps it always would be. Michael also carried his own wounds. He had trouble trusting new people. When someone got too close, when someone showed excessive interest, he would pull back. His therapist, Dr. Beatrice, worked on this with him. She said it wasn't about never trusting again. It was about trusting wisely, about paying attention to the signs, about not ignoring his instincts. Michael tried. It was a constant effort. One Saturday morning, Helen woke up with an unusual urge. She wanted to organize Albert's belongings. For over a year, since everything had happened, she hadn't touched those objects. His clothes were still in the closet, his books on the shelf, his letters in the drawer. It was as if, by keeping everything untouched, she could somehow keep his presence alive. But now, she felt it was time. Not to forget. Never to forget. But to reorganize. To give new meaning to those objects. She called Michael and Yvonne. Together they began to sort through things. It was an emotional process. Each piece of clothing brought back a memory. The suit Albert had worn to a friend's wedding. The shirt he wore on Sundays. The watch Helen had given him for his 50th birthday. She would pick up each item, caress it, remember, and then, carefully, she would decide its fate. Some things would be donated, others stored in organized boxes, and some, the most special ones, would be kept in places of honor. Michael found a wooden box at the back of the closet. Inside were letters his father had written over the years, to his wife, to his son, to himself. Michael opened one addressed to him and began to read. "My dear Michael, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. And that's okay. Life is a cycle. But I want you to know a few things. First, that I am immensely proud of you, of the man you have become, the dedicated professional, the loving son. Second, I want you to always remember to balance work and life. I know it's hard. I spent my whole life trying to find that balance and didn't always succeed, but it's important. Your mother, my great love, will always be your priority. Take care of her, protect her, but also let her live. She is strong, stronger than you can imagine. And third, don't be afraid to love. I know life can hurt, that people can disappoint. But true love, the kind built on respect, partnership, and truth, is worth every risk. Go on, my son. Build your own happiness. And know that I will always be with you, in the wind that rustles the window, in the sun that warms your skin, in the silence of the night. I will be there. With eternal love, your father, Albert." Michael finished reading with tears streaming down his face. Helen, who was beside him, was also crying. She hugged her son, and they stayed like that for long minutes. It was a farewell, but also a renewed connection. Albert was there somehow. In the words, in the memories, in the love he had left as a legacy. After that day, Michael carried the letter with him. He read it whenever he felt lost, and he found in his father's words guidance and comfort. Helen also found something significant in that cleaning, an old journal that Albert had kept. She had never known of its existence. It was simple, bound in brown leather. Inside were notes about daily life, reflections, thoughts, and on one of the last pages, a note that made her stop. "Helen, my love, if you ever find this journal, I want you to know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are light, you are strength, you are everything good in the world, and if I go first, promise me you will keep living, truly living, not just existing. Travel, read, laugh, dance, love, because you deserve all the happiness in the world. Don't be tied to the past. I will be fine, wherever I am. And I will want you to be fine too. With all my heart, Albert." Helen closed the journal and hugged it to her chest. She felt as if Albert were there, speaking directly to her, telling her it was okay, that she could move on, that he would always be with her, but that she needed to live. And she decided to do just that. Live. A few weeks later, Helen did something that surprised everyone. She signed up for a painting class. She had always admired art, but had never tried it. She thought she had no talent. But now at 84, she decided it was time to try. And what if she wasn't good? It didn't matter. The important thing was to experience it. The first class was challenging. She felt insecure, surrounded by younger people, some very talented. But the teacher, a young and encouraging woman named Paula, was kind. She said that art wasn't about perfection, it was about expression, about putting on paper what you felt in your soul. Helen started slowly, simple colors, basic shapes, but gradually she loosened up. She painted the garden, she painted the house, she painted memories, and she discovered that she did have talent. Not an impressive technical talent, but a unique perspective, a way of seeing the world that was all her own. Michael, upon seeing his mother's first painting, a picture of the blooming rose bushes, was moved. He framed the canvas and hung it in the living room, there for everyone to see, a symbol of a new beginning. Yvonne also had her own transformations. With her financial situation more stable, she decided to go back to school. She enrolled in a technical course in administration. She wanted to learn how to better manage her finances, maybe one day open her own business. Helen and Michael were completely supportive. They bought her books, paid her tuition, and adjusted her work schedule so she could attend classes. And Yvonne, who had always been a simple and humble woman, began to see herself differently, no longer just as a housekeeper, but as a capable woman, intelligent, deserving of opportunities. One day, during an administration class, the professor asked each student to share a story of overcoming adversity. Yvonne hesitated, but then she took a deep breath and told her story. She told them about the Miller house, about Helen, about Vanessa, about how she had discovered the truth and saved a life. The class listened in silence. At the end, everyone applauded. The professor called her a hero. Yvonne, for the first time, allowed herself to feel proud. Fall arrived in New York. The leaves on the garden trees began to turn yellow and fall. Helen, Michael, and Yvonne would sit on the porch on cool afternoons, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. About Yvonne's children, about cases at the office, about Helen's paintings, about life. One of those afternoons, Michael received an unexpected call. It was the lawyer who had handled the divorce. Vanessa had tried to contest the settlement. She claimed she had been coerced, that she deserved more. Michael tensed. He looked at his mother, who was beside him, and saw the worry on her face. The lawyer continued. But he said there was nothing to worry about. The evidence was solid. The recording, the medical testimonies, everything was documented. The judge had already denied the request for review. Vanessa couldn't change anything. It was the definitive end of that chapter. Michael hung up and looked at his mother. She let out the breath she had been holding. "It's over," Michael said. "For real this time." Helen nodded, and then, surprisingly, she smiled. "You know something, Michael. I don't feel angry at her, not anymore. I feel sorry for her, sorry for someone who was so lost, so desperate, that she thought destroying another person was the solution. I hope she finds help. I hope she finds peace. Because living with the weight of what she did can't be easy." Michael looked at his mother with admiration. This woman who had suffered so much still had compassion, still had the capacity to forgive. It wasn't an acceptance of what had happened, but a liberation from hatred. "You're incredible, Mum. I'm a survivor, son, and I've learned that holding on to resentment only hurts me, so I choose not to carry it. I choose to be free." Those words stayed with Michael, and with Yvonne, who heard everything from the kitchen, to be free, not from circumstances, but from feelings that imprison. The following months were a time of consolidation. Helen continued to paint, attend her classes, and make new friends. Michael started dating again. He met Julianne, an architect, at a lecture on urbanism. She was different from Vanessa in every way. Open, transparent, with no hidden agendas. They started slowly. Michael introduced her to his mother only after 6 months. Helen, cautious at first, gradually warmed up to her. Julianne was genuine, and she respected the family. She didn't try to replace anything or anyone, she just added to it. Yvonne finished her administration course with honors. On graduation day, Helen and Michael were there, in the audience, applauding. Yvonne walked onto the stage to receive her certificate with tears in her eyes. She had never imagined she would get there, but she had, and it was just the beginning. 2 years had passed since that fateful night. The Miller brownstone was now a symbol of resilience and love. The walls, which had witnessed so much pain, now witnessed joy. The garden, which had nearly died, was lush. The rose bushes bloomed in vibrant shades of pink and purple. Their scent filled the air. The dogwood tree blossomed every spring. Helen, at 86, had more vitality than many people decades younger. She still painted. She still did her needlepoint. She still lived. Michael, at 50, had found balance. Work, family, love, all in harmony. Yvonne, with her degree and her new home consulting business, was thriving. One evening, at Helen's request, the three of them gathered in the living room. She wanted to talk about something important. They sat down, curious. "I want to thank you both," she began, her voice firm but emotional. "Michael, you are my son, my pride, my reason for living. And Yvonne, you are my friend, my savior, my sister in spirit. You gave me back my life, literally, and I will never forget it. Mom, you don't have to thank us. Yes, I do, because you taught me something fundamental, that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always light, there is always hope, there is always love, and as long as those things exist, life is worth living." Helen pulled out a box that was hidden beside her armchair. She opened it and revealed two gifts. For Michael, a watch, his father's watch, the one she had given Albert decades ago. For Yvonne, a necklace, an antique necklace from Helen's mother, passed down through generations. "I want you to have these, not as objects but as symbols. Michael, the watch to remind you that time is precious, use it well. Love without fear, live fully. Yvonne, the necklace to remind you that you are family. You always have been. You always will be." They both cried. They hugged Helen, and in that moment, the whole house seemed to glow, as if all the past pain had been transmuted into light. The following years were peaceful. Helen lived to be 92. She passed away quietly in her sleep on a sunny spring afternoon. Michael and Yvonne were by her side. She was not alone, she was not afraid, she was at peace, and she left behind a legacy of love, strength, and forgiveness. Michael, though devastated by the loss, knew that his mother had lived her final years to the fullest, that she had reclaimed what had been taken from her, that she had been happy, and that was all that mattered. Yvonne, for her part, remained a part of the family. She continued to look after the house, but now not as an employee, as a guardian of memories, as a bridge between the past and the future. Michael married Julianne. They had a daughter, Helen, in honor of her grandmother, and they told her whenever they could about the incredible woman her grandmother had been, about her strength, her resilience, about the love that conquers all. The brownstone on the Upper West Side remained standing. The old walls, the classic details, the iron gate, everything stayed. But the energy was different. It was light. It was loving. It was alive. And every time Michael walked through the living room and saw the painting of the rose bushes, painted by his mother, he smiled, because he knew that no matter how difficult life can be, there are always new beginnings. There are always flowers that bloom even after the harshest winter. There is always light, even after the deepest darkness. And that light, that hope, that love, were Helen's true legacy. A legacy that would live on forever, in the stories told, in the memories shared, in the hearts of those who loved her. Because in the end, what really matters is not how long we live, but how we live, with dignity, with love, with truth. And Helen lived exactly that way, until her very last breath.